CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Live from London, this is The World Today.
Hello, I'm Jamie Owen. Welcome to the programme. Our top stories: United States Special Envoy John Kerry in China as the world's two biggest polluters try to restart stalled climate talks. Our other headlines: Southern Europe braces for record temperatures this week as a second heat wave heats the region. Russia blames Ukraine for what it calls a terror attack on the Crimea bridge that's left 2 people dead. And no deal on Ukrainian grain exports. Moscow withdraws from the Black Sea Initiative, blaming systemic problems. The United States climate envoy John Kerry says it's imperative that Washington and Beijing make real progress on efforts to combat global warming. Kerry's in China's capital meeting his counterpart, Xi Jinping. The world's 2 largest polluters are aiming to restore relations following a suspension in climate talks last year. Well, let's talk to our correspondent, Sun Tianyuan in Beijing. And what more can you tell us about this visit, and what, if any, progress might there be?
Yes, Jamie, Chinese climate envoy Xi Jinping has met with his U.S. counterpart John Kerry in Beijing today, and the envoys started their talks earlier in the morning. My colleagues and I were waiting outside the closed-door meeting the whole day, and what we heard from the insiders that a range of topics, including methane emissions and coal reduction, were discussed. So, well, it's unclear whether an agreement or a deal will be reached during Kerry's visit. However, the face-to-face dialogue held today marks the resumption of formal climate talks between China and the U.S. after a year-long halt. The suspension was part of Beijing's response to former U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan last August, which seriously strained ties and mutual trust. China's foreign ministry says Beijing will implement the spirit of the Bali meeting between the 2 heads of state and exchange in-depth views with Washington on climate change-related issues. And the 2 sides will work together to address the challenges. Over the years, China and the U.S. have had significant cooperation in combating global warming. One of their major achievements was the conclusion of the 2015 Paris Agreement. In April 2021, the 2 countries agreed to work together to strengthen the implementation of the agreement. And this includes goals to limit the global average temperature increase to well below 2 degrees Celsius and to pursue efforts to limit the increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. So this is Kerry's 3rd trip to China as the U.S. Special Presidential Climate Envoy, and he's also the 3rd senior U.S. official to visit the country over the past month, following U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen's visit last week and Secretary of State Antony Blinken in June. So these frequent high-level exchanges are seen by many as a sign of a thaw in China-U.S. relations. However, experts say more concrete actions are needed to achieve tangible results. And the world's 2 largest economies still have multiple disputes in the climate sector that need to be addressed. So whether Kerry's visit can help China and the United States make real progress in climate cooperation remains to be seen over the next few days and even coming month. Back to you, Jamie.
Sun Tianyuan, our correspondent in Beijing. Thank you for that. Well, Tom Woodruff is a senior fellow and the founding director of the Asia Society Policy Institute's China Climate Hub. CGTN's Paul Barber asked him about the significance of John Kerry's visits.
I think it's really important that the world's 2 largest emitters can find a way to work together. And I actually think this visit is a real opportunity to test whether some actual meat can be put on the bone of the US-China relationship more generally. We've seen both Tony Blinken and then Janet Yellen's visit in the last month really test the willingness for engagement, particularly with Tony Blinken's visit. This trip is now designed to really test if there's actually some genuine instruments of cooperation that can be forged between both sides.
And the focus of your work, Tom, at the Asia Society is on China-US climate cooperation and diplomacy. How can China and the US collaborate more effectively to tackle climate challenges? And what concrete outcomes do you hope to see from John Kerry's trip to Beijing?
The holy grail outcome from the US perspective would be if the Chinese are prepared to isolate climate change from the rest of the relationship. And what that does is it helps protect that cooperation in the event of a geopolitical disagreement elsewhere. And frankly, that's what we saw last year when Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, and then Beijing cut off cooperation and engagement with the United States in 8 areas, one of which was climate change. Now, I'm a pragmatist. I actually don't think we're going to see that come out of this visit. But what I do think we will see is effectively a return to a whole bunch of actions that the two countries agreed to take together at the end of 2021, just before Nancy Pelosi's visit. And those actions included both at a practical level, some really concrete action to do with methane emissions, but also at a procedural level, establishing a whole bunch of working groups in different areas to do with climate change, which was really designed to sort of share lessons learned with respect to, for example, how to massively roll out electric vehicle infrastructure in the United States, which is an area where China has done some really impressive work, and other areas like that. So they're the kind of things that I think we're likely to see come out of this visit.
So you're looking at realistic outcomes, managing expectations perhaps. But can in-person meetings between the world's 2 biggest carbon emitters help to build a positive momentum, and what does that mean for the rest of the world?
Diplomacy is all about people, and absolutely it's important that that John Kerry and his counterpart Xie Zhenhua actually have an opportunity just to meet in person. They haven't done that now for all of 2023. Xie Zhenhua has also had a number of public health concerns during that period, which has been part of the fact. But I think here a positive signal does a couple of things. First of all, on climate change, it sends a really powerful signalling effect to the rest of the world that the 2 largest emitters are actually getting on with the job of reducing emissions and adapting to its impacts. And in 2014, when they did so similarly, that was the greatest catalyst in terms of actually the Paris Agreement being forged the following year. So we know that when the 2 can get along, it actually demonstrably has an impact on the rest of the world's actions.
Well, a remote township in northwest China saw its heatwave reach unprecedented levels, logging a temperature of more than 52 degrees Celsius. Sanbao Township in Xinjiang's Turban Depression was battling extreme cold just a few months ago, raising concern over adapting to rapidly changing climate. Countries across Asia have been experiencing scorching weather since April. South Korea's President Yoon has blamed authorities for failing to follow disaster response rules as the death toll from days of torrential rain and flooding rose to at least 40 people. This includes a dozen people who were found dead in a submerged underpass. Yoon visited residents of a village after a landslide killed 19 people and left others missing. A wildfire continues to blaze out of control on Spain's Canary Island of La Palma, where more than 5,000 people have been forced from their homes, and part of a large national park is also in flames. This all comes as another summer heatwave scorches southern Europe, with record temperatures expected this week. Our correspondent Ken Brown reports.
Thousands of homes evacuated, almost 4,000 hectares burned, and a national park in danger. That's the toll so far of a wildfire that continues to rage out of control on La Palma, one of the Canary Islands. I've never seen a fire spread so fast, one local told Spanish TV, as some 400 firefighters, 9 helicopters and 2 airplanes continue to fight the blaze. Local town halls have become temporary shelters, and a team of psychologists is on site helping the displaced. The fire burns on as another heatwave sweeps across Spain and southern Europe, expected to bring record temperatures. 16 Italian cities are under red alert as Rome could mark 43 degrees on Tuesday, while in Athens the Acropolis is shutting down during the hottest part of the day to protect tourists. Europe's hottest ever temperature recorded, 48.8 degrees Celsius in Sicily, could be surpassed this week. Jaén and Córdoba in southern Spain are braced for 44-degree days, as Madrid also bakes in more than 40 degrees.
Of course we're concerned, particularly here in Madrid at over 40 degrees. Older people suffer more from this.
Where are we going to end up with heat like this? The consequences are scary for our skin, our health in general, and everything else.
Experts point to climate change as the driver of these extraordinary temperatures.
The population is more conscious now of the changes we are suffering with heat waves, like this one becoming more frequent and more extreme. From our perspective, in the scientific community, we try to make people understand that this situation will only get worse.
2022 saw forest fires reduce over 3,000 square kilometres of Spanish countryside to ashes. That was the worst year on record for wildfires. And firefighting officials tell CGTN that this year could be even worse. But there is some good news on the Canaries. Favourable wind overnight stalled the spread, and officials are trying to keep the fire from getting deeper into the Caldera de Taburiente National Park. The forest fire is the first natural crisis on La Palma since the volcanic eruption in September 2021, when lava from the Cumbre Vieja volcano forced thousands of people to leave their homes. Now the island's residents are hoping that this serious wildfire can be brought under control as the reality of the climate emergency hits home in Europe. Ken Brown, CGTN, Madrid.
People in the southeast of the Greek capital have been ordered to leave their homes as a wildfire broke out, fanned by strong winds. The blaze has burned nearby vegetation and is threatening buildings in the village of Kouvaras. Let's talk to our correspondent Evangelo Sipsas in Athens. Evangelo, what's the latest on this fire?
Well, as you can see right now behind me, the flames have gone into communities here south of the Greek capital, the areas of Lagonisi, Loutraki, Kalivia. They all have been evacuated due to the fire. Now, as you can tell, there's high winds that it's making it very difficult for the firefighters and those who are on the scene trying to fight and put these fires out. The fire constantly changes. We're talking about a fire front right now about 4 to 5 kilometers long, and anywhere you turn your head right now here, you can see behind me a number of smoke coming out. Unfortunately, though, we also have another fire near the Corinth, the ancient city of Corinth, that is also right now threatening a number of houses. There's been reports that people have been evacuated and people have been taken to nearby shelters. Also near here, there's been a number of camps with over 1,200 children attending. They all had to be evacuated just moments before the fire ripped through that community. I'm going to show you again right behind me right now. The smoke just keeps on coming. The wind is picking up, and unfortunately, it's making it very, very difficult for the authorities. The civil ministry will be holding a meeting soon to see what the next steps will be taken. Now, on this report, we're going to be continuing to giving you more information, as unfortunately, these fires keeps on picking up.
Evangelo, thank you for that. Our correspondent Evangelo Sipsas in Athens. The United States Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says she's working with her Indian counterpart to develop an investment platform that will help fast-track India's energy transition. This all follows a meeting on the sidelines of the G20 Finance Ministers Summit in the western Indian state of Gujarat. Climate change is high on their agenda alongside rising debt in low-income countries. You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Russia blames Ukraine for the attack on the Crimea bridge that's left 2 people dead.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliette Mann.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Hello, welcome back. A reminder of our top stories. United States Special Envoy John Kerry is in China as the world's two biggest polluters try to restart stalled climate talks. Our other headlines: Southern Europe braces for record temperatures this week as a second heat wave hits the region. A reported drone attack on the Kerch Bridge has damaged the supply route connecting Russia and Crimea. The attack came as Russian President Vladimir Putin withdrew from the Black Sea grain export deal. Moscow claims Ukraine was behind the attack. Kyiv has not yet commented. Our correspondent Li Jianhua reports.
The Kerch Bridge, which connects the Crimean Peninsula to Russia, has been attacked again. 2 people have been killed and their daughter injured. Russian officials say there were 2 explosions overnight, which collapsed one span of the bridge and damaged a second. The road section of the bridge is closed, but rail services have been restored.
About the emergency on the Crimean Bridge, the car traffic has been stopped. The reasons are being investigated. We ask all the guests and residents of the region to use the land corridor through the new regions of Russia. The information on resuming the car traffic will soon be published by the Ministry of Transportation of Russia.
The Russian Foreign Ministry has condemned what it called a Ukrainian terrorist attack. A source within Ukraine's intelligence service says Kyiv carried out the attack and that maritime drones were used. CGTN reached out to the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry, but it has yet to comment. This has been the second major incident on the Kerch Bridge in the past year. It was partially closed following an explosion in October and reopened in February. Ukraine admitted indirectly to the attack months later. The bridge was opened in 2018, 4 years after Moscow took control of Crimea, and is a key supply route for Russian troops fighting in Ukraine. Li Jianhua, CGTN.
So Russia says the Black Sea grain deal has expired. The initiative brokered by the United Nations and Turkey has been in place since last year and was due to run out on Monday. It allowed for the safe export of Ukrainian grain across the Black Sea to international markets. While it has agreed to 3 previous extensions in the past, Moscow has been threatening to suspend cooperation, saying its calls for similar safeguards to protect Russian exports have been ignored. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. Dasha, firstly, the attack on the bridge in Crimea. What is Moscow saying?
Well, Moscow accuses Ukraine of carrying out what Moscow describes as an act of terrorism. We have heard Russia's investigative committee opening a criminal case on the grounds of an act of terrorism. Moscow insists that the Ukrainian side has used maritime drones to attack the Crimean Bridge, and the Russian officials here say that Kyiv couldn't help but know that the infrastructure of this section of the Crimean Bridge was used in civilian purposes only. So we know that 2 people have died. That was a man and a woman, and their daughter, who is underage, she's 14 years old, has become an orphan. She was also injured, but her condition is stable at the moment. We also know that this family is from Belgorod, the area in Russia that has been repeatedly coming under the Ukrainian shelling. We have heard the Russian officials also accusing the Western countries, the Western intelligence. For instance, Maria Zakharova, the spokesperson for the Russian Foreign Ministry, said that the foreign intelligence of Britain and the United States was was involved into the decision-making when the Ukrainian officials and politicians are making such decisions. They are consulted by their Western advisors. So certainly very strong wording from Russia, but we're also expecting more to come later in the day after the Russian president holds a meeting with his security officials. Also, interesting detail here is that the Russian officials are now also talking about the possible consequences of this attack, suggesting that it only explains that Russia has to go further in its so-called special military operation and to cut Ukraine off from the Black Sea.
And Turkey's President Erdogan says he's going to call Russia's President Putin to try to get the Black Sea grain deal going again. But Moscow's language seems pretty final.
Well, that's right. We have just heard from the Russian mission to the United Nations saying that the Russian decision is final. There will be no further negotiations. That's according to the Russian officials at the United Nations. They stress that Russia is willing to see some concrete results when it comes to the implementation of the Russia-UN memorandum that was signed last year as part of this package agreement that it has been known as Black Sea grain deal. And Moscow so far has not seen any result of that. So Moscow is calling for not the promises, but the concrete results. And Moscow says that should one of those provisions be implemented, that immediately Moscow will be willing to return to this Black Sea grain initiative. But also, very interestingly, the experts here in Russia have all been saying that Russia will only benefit from the exit from the Black Sea grain deal, suggesting that anyway, this arrangement was not working. There's been no facilitation of the Russian agricultural goods to the international market. So they just continue business as usual, as it has been the case since the February 24, 2022.
Dasha, thank you for that. Our correspondent Dasha Chernyshova in Moscow. Let's talk now to Arnaud Petit, the Executive Director of the International Grains Council. Arnaud Petit, just help us here. Just explain how important was the grain deal for Ukraine, Russia, and come to that, the rest of the world.
Thank you very much for having me in your program. Indeed, the corridors help all the business sector and trading sector to operate normally, if I may say so, in the Black Sea region for Ukraine and also for Russia. Both countries have exported more than 75 million tons of grain. So you see how it has been very relevant, more than 30% of the wheat exported globally. So that's what's the positive side of this grains corridor.
Can you explain to us the possible implications for European food prices and secondly, for the humanitarian situation in Africa?
So the first consequence is the increase of the wheat price. And definitively, we have seen a plus 7% increase from last Friday. And there is no reason to this increase stop now with a new declaration from the delegation of Russia. Now what we have to look in the future is we know that EU need always to import corn, but thanks to a very good production in Brazil and in US, so we expect that there would be not too much impact for the livestock sector in EU. But the problem will be really on wheat market and particularly for the poorest country, because the alternatives will be only in regions where the wheat is much more higher in price than the Black Sea region.
Given that Russia has been voicing dissatisfaction for so long, why haven't alternatives to Ukraine's grain export been explored or discussed?
Well, I would say the grain sector in Ukraine have developed a new alternative in terms of means of transportation. There is by train to EU, even if at current time it's blocked and would only resume by September. And also the Ukrainian sector have invested a lot on river ports, and they have invested in more than 12 terminals in order to export the grains via the Danube. So only one thing is these two means of transportation are more costly than the deep sea port shipments.
Arnaud Petit, the Executive Director of the International Grains Council, thank you very much indeed for talking to us.
Thank you.
Moscow has seized control of the Russian operations of the yogurt manufacturer Danone and the beer brewer Carlsberg. The two companies have been put under what's been called temporary management. Earlier this year, Moscow introduced new rules allowing it to seize the assets of companies from countries designated unfriendly. Danone and Carlsberg have been in the process of selling their Russian businesses. China says its economy grew less than expected, 0.8% in the second quarter for a 6.3% annual figure. Officials, though, say Beijing can achieve its target of 5% growth for the full year. At the same time, retail sales fell 9.6% in June from the previous month, and property investment was lower as well. As slower growth kicks in, more young people are having trouble finding jobs, and youth unemployment rose to a record 21.3%. Tropical storm Talim has strengthened into a typhoon and is set to be the first to make landfall in China this year. It's prompted the authorities to issue flood warnings, cancel flights and trains, and order people along the southern coast between Guangdong and Hainan to stay at home. Markets in Hong Kong halted trade for the day due to the severe weather alerts. Scientists in Russia are forecasting powerful solar flare activity on Monday, which could disrupt satellite and radio communications. 3 flares were observed on the sun on Sunday, each lasting around 14 minutes. Scientists say they can cause large geomagnetic disturbances on Earth that's expected to impact the shortwave radios used mainly by the military and people working at sea and emergency services. And that is the world today. Thank you for watching. There's more news on CGTN Europe's Telegram channel, or scan the QR code on the screen to get stories and updates sent direct to your phone. We're back with more news at the top of this hour. Coming up next, it's World Insight. For now, from all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Hello and welcome to the weather forecast. I'm Tierney. Well, over to Europe. Wet weather will continue to focus here across the north and eastern portions of Europe over the next couple of days, and most of them will be in the form of some light to moderate intensity of rain, along with the potential scattered thunderstorms. And notice that here for the majority of Spain, Italy, and the Balkans are likely to see rather clear conditions over the next couple of days, as well as with pretty hot temperatures. And most of the temperatures in the region will be probably record-setting or even record-breaking over the next few days. And though some cooler temperatures are likely to come in as of this Wednesday, no significant relief is in sight in the near future. And take a closer look at a business and travel outlook for the major cities up in the north. Showers for Copenhagen, Stockholm, as well as Helsinki, with high temperatures of 23 degrees Celsius on Wednesday. And Moscow will also see chance of showers in the morning hours with a high of 21 and low about 13 degrees Celsius. And for major cities across the western portion of Europe, Paris will see partly sunny skies with high temperatures in the upper 20s, and scorching high temperatures will hit Madrid with high temperatures touching the 40 degrees Celsius mark with plenty of sunshine. So please drink plenty of water, stay indoors as much as possible to stay cool. And for other major cities across the central portions, Berlin is likely to see chance of showers in the afternoon hours with a high of 28 and low about 14 degrees Celsius. And that is all from me. Stay tuned for more City Forecast.